Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm sure my colleagues will make excellent contributions in a few minutes' time when they get that opportunity. Mr. Chair, I want to pick up where my colleague Claire Curran has just left off in terms of talking about the role of not just regional and provincial cinemas, but also the independent ones that are in the cities as well. And the Chair remarked briefly earlier that he could remember the days of silent films, in fact, in the cinema, and no doubt standing for the national anthem and generally behaving yourself. I have to confess to the House that I was once removed from the Century Theatre in Dunedin for the rolling of Jaffas down the aisle. So that's right. If Chris Farfway had been there, there wouldn't have been any Jaffas available to roll down the aisle. But those sorts of cinemas within our history, those sorts of cinemas have a very important place in our history and indeed in the present day in many places. I want to make special mention of a cinema that Claire Curran mentioned, which was the Penthouse Cinema in Brooklyn here in Wellington, and they in fact made contact with me as this bill was making progress through the House, and they made the point very strongly that as an independent cinema they operate within the industry in quite a different way to the large chains that we know of, the Readings and so on, that we know of. They are not operating on a business model that is in tune with being able to automatically get a film on release, put it out, and reap the benefits of that as a business in the same way that those large cinema chains do. They continue to rely on usually a local community who will come along to a film, and it won't necessarily be immediately upon its release. So this is not just a problem for provincial New Zealand, it's about the different business models that operate within the cinema industry in New Zealand. And we had, I think, as a parliament, hoped that by now we would have moved to digital technology operating in such a way that all cinemas would be in a position to be able to deal with the removal of the what was 9-month and now 5-month grace period. That hasn't happened, Mr. Chair, and it hasn't happened for a host of different reasons. Some of those are to do with the way in which the cinema industry generally is actually struggling, because people, despite anything to do with parallel importing, are no longer going to the movies in the way that they did. But I back what Claire Curran has said, that this is actually about part of New Zealand's culture and about ensuring that these independent cinemas can continue to have their place. So I do support the bill in its current form, but I do recognise that it is not the long-term solution. And there is absolutely no doubt that we will have as a parliament to accept at some point that this legislation will expire and that the time will come for which there won't be this kind of grace period. But the fact is the cinema industry does need this, and the independent cinemas do need the extension that we've now got. The second point that I want to make is actually around the broader issue of copyright as it's discussed in this bill. And it is quite clear to me that the issues of copyright have got away on this government, and that the review that was promised should have happened. And the situation I don't want to see New Zealand get into is one where our copyright law ends up being dictated by somebody else. And that is the danger that we run if we do not look at our own copyright law in the next year at the longest, because the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement currently does contain language around copyright. There's no doubt that even if it doesn't emerge out of the TPP, or the TPP takes longer to complete than is hoped by the proponents of it, that it will include some references to copyright, or later agreements that New Zealand signs internationally will start to impact on our copyright law. If we take seriously our role as a parliament and as sovereign in this, representing the sovereign in this country, then we should be in control of an area like copyright. We should bring New Zealanders along with us in terms of what they want to see a regime contain. And the kind of legislation we have here is the sort of incremental, we need to change a bit here and a bit there and extend this exclusion out. That's actually not the way to run copyright law in New Zealand. So I would encourage the government to get on with the job in that regard. I know that there are a wide variety of views in this Parliament and across New Zealand around what the future is for copyright, but let's make it a New Zealand solution to that, not one that's imposed on us. Well, Jonathan Young says it's international. He's right, it's in an international context, but do we want the decisions about that being taken by negotiators in a room somewhere around the world, or do we want those decisions to be driven, Mr. Chair?
Grant Robertson.
Do we want those decisions to be driven by us and what is in the interest of New Zealanders? And I would suggest that the latter is what we should be doing, and that is what the government should take heed of. Mr. Chair, I'm not going to take up the full part of the rest of this call. I just want to note that as the film industry does evolve over the next, or the cinema industry does evolve over the next few years, that we make sure that the government and others are alongside it so that we do not end up back here in 2016. I don't think there is an appetite in this House to see this extended any longer, but I do support the bill so that those independent cinemas can continue to provide the service they provide. And I hope that this Parliament recognises that cinemas in New Zealand will not just be, in the future, we hope, those provided by the large international chains, but they will still represent the communities that they serve.
Mr. Chair.
Dr. David Clark.
Mr. Chair, thank you.